The old man's hand trembled as he gripped the boy's shoulder. Blood soaked through his shirt, spreading fast. He could barely breathe. The boardroom was silent except for the sound of his gasping. And then the boy, no more than 12 years old, looked him straight in the eye and whispered words that didn't make sense. "Don't be afraid, sir. My father will save you." The billionaire stared at the child, confusion mixing with pain, because he knew for certain this boy's father was dead. Before we continue, I want to invite you to subscribe to Sage Stories if you haven't already. We share powerful true stories about real people, resilience, and the quiet moments that change everything. Hit that like button if this story moves you, and leave a comment below sharing your thoughts. Your voice matters here. Now let's get back to the story. Richard Calloway didn't believe in miracles. He believed in quarterly reports, market projections, and the cold mathematics of profit margins. At 63 years old, he had built an empire that stretched across 3 continents. His name opened doors that remained closed to others. His signature on a contract could change entire industries overnight. But none of that power meant anything the morning he collapsed. In his private office on the 42nd floor of the Calloway Tower in downtown Chicago, the heart attack came without warning. One moment he was reviewing acquisition documents. The next he was on the floor, chest burning like someone had poured molten steel into his ribcage. His assistant found him there, called the paramedics, started the chain of emergency responses that money could buy. They stabilized him, flew him to the best cardiac center in the state, told him he was lucky, told him he needed to slow down, reduce stress, reconsider his priorities. Richard heard the words but didn't really listen. 3 weeks later, he was back in the office, back to the 18-hour days, back to the relentless pursuit of more because more was all he knew how to chase.
He had a daughter once, Elena. She left when she was 19.
Walked out of the penthouse apartment with a single suitcase and eyes that held more disappointment than anger. She said she couldn't watch him destroy himself anymore, said she needed to find a life that meant something beyond bank accounts and boardrooms. He told her she was being naive, told her the real world didn't care about ideals. They hadn't spoken in over a decade. Richard told himself he didn't miss her, told himself he had made peace with her absence. But sometimes, late at night when the office was empty and the city lights stretched out below him like scattered diamonds, he would pull up old photos on his phone. Elena as a little girl, gap-toothed and laughing. Elena at her high school graduation, already pulling away. Elena looking at him with eyes that asked a question he never knew how to answer. He always closed the photos quickly, got back to work. Work was safer than memory. The building collapse happened on a Tuesday morning in late September. Richard was scheduled to tour a new property acquisition on the south side. An old textile factory his company planned to convert into luxury condominiums. The neighborhood had seen better days. Boarded up storefronts, cracked sidewalks, people who looked at his car with expressions that mixed curiosity and resentment. His development team assured him this area was ripe for transformation. He saw dollar signs where others saw decay. The factory building was structurally sound, or so the reports claimed. Richard walked through with his chief engineer and 2 contractors, discussing timelines and budgets. They were on the 2nd floor when it happened. A sound like thunder, but from below. The floor lurched. Someone shouted. And then everything became chaos and dust and the terrible sensation of falling. Richard didn't remember the impact. Didn't remember the initial moments after. His first clear memory was of silence, heavy and complete, broken only by his own ragged breathing. He was pinned beneath a massive concrete beam, his legs trapped. His left arm bent at an angle that sent waves of nausea through him. Dust filled his mouth. Darkness pressed in from all sides except for a thin shaft of light, cutting through the rubble somewhere above. He tried to call out, but his voice came as barely a whisper. Pain radiated through his entire body. He could taste blood, could feel his heartbeat stuttering, irregular, the same dangerous rhythm he remembered from his heart attack. Not like this, he thought. Not here, not alone. Time lost meaning. Minutes or hours, he couldn't tell. The pain came in waves. During the quieter moments between waves, his mind drifted. He thought about Elena, wondered where she was now, wondered if she would even come to his funeral. Probably not. He had burned that bridge so thoroughly there wasn't even ash left. That's when he heard the voice. Small, young, cutting through the darkness. "Hello? Is someone there?" Richard tried to respond, managed a weak sound that might have been a word. The voice came closer. I can hear you. Don't worry. I'm going to help. A beam of light swept across the rubble. A phone flashlight. And then Richard saw him. A boy, 12 or maybe 13, thin and covered in dust, navigating through the collapsed structure with careful steps. The kid had blood on his forehead, but his eyes were alert, focused. Are you hurt bad? The boy asked, kneeling beside Richard. I can't move, Richard managed. My legs, I think my heart. The boy's expression remained calm, more calm than any child should be in such circumstances. Okay. I'm going to get you out. But you have to stay with me. You have to keep breathing. Who are you? Richard whispered. My name's Marcus. I was across the street when it happened. Saw the building come down. You need to get out of here, Richard said. It's not safe. Get yourself to safety. Marcus shook his head. Not without you. The boy began moving debris piece by piece, creating a small clearing around Richard. His hands were small, but he worked with purpose. Richard watched through a haze of pain and confusion. This didn't make sense. What kind of kid runs into a collapsed building? You shouldn't be here, Richard said again. My dad taught me something, Marcus replied, not looking up from his work. He said when you see someone who needs help, you don't calculate the risk. You don't think about what's convenient. You just help. Because that's what it means to be human. Your father sounds like a good man. He died 2 years ago. Richard felt something crack open inside his chest. Something that had nothing to do with physical injury. I'm sorry. Marcus kept working. He was trying to shift the beam pinning Richard's legs, but it was too heavy. The boy's face showed frustration for the first time. I need tools, Marcus muttered. I need help. Richard's vision was starting to blur. He could feel himself slipping, the same way he'd felt during his heart attack, distant, disconnected. Marcus put his hand on Richard's shoulder. Hey, stay with me. Don't be afraid, sir. My father will save you. Richard's eyes focused on the boy's face. Your father is dead. You just said. I know, Marcus said quietly, but he taught me everything I know. Every move I'm making right now, every choice, it's because of him. He's saving you through me. That's how it works. The people we love, the people who teach us how to be better, they never really leave. They save people through us. Richard stared at this child. This impossible child with dirt on his face and wisdom in his eyes that shouldn't exist at 12 years old. He wanted to argue, to say that was just pretty sentiment, but he couldn't form the words, because somewhere deep down he understood exactly what Marcus meant. He thought of his own father, dead 20 years now, a quiet man who'd worked 2 jobs to send Richard to college. He thought of all the times his father had told him that success without compassion was just another form of poverty. He'd forgotten that, or maybe he'd chosen to forget. Marcus pulled out his phone, tried to get a signal. Nothing. The kid looked around, assessing, and Richard could see him making calculations, forming a plan. I'm going to go get help, Marcus said. Real help, equipment, but I need you to promise me you'll stay awake. Can you do that? Richard nodded weakly. Promise me. I promise. Marcus started to climb back through the rubble, then paused. He came back, crouched beside Richard again. You know what my dad used to say? He said every person you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about. So be kind always, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. The boy disappeared into the darkness. Richard lay there, trapped and broken, those words echoing in his mind. Every person you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about. How many people had he crushed in his rise to the top? How many lives had he disrupted with his developments? His acquisitions, his relentless pursuit of profit? He told himself it was just business. Told himself he was creating value, generating growth. But growth for whom? Value for whom? Elena had tried to tell him. Years ago, when she was still talking to him, she'd asked him to visit one of the neighborhoods his company was redeveloping, asked him to meet the people being displaced, to hear their stories. He'd refused. Said it would compromise his objectivity. Said business and sentiment didn't mix. She'd looked at him with such sadness. You've already compromised everything that matters. Dad, you just can't see it yet. He saw it now, lying in the dark, possibly dying, saved by a child who had every reason to run but chose to stay. He saw it with painful clarity. Time passed. Richard drifted in and out of consciousness. He tried to keep his promise to Marcus, tried to stay awake. But the darkness kept pulling at him. He thought he heard voices at one point. Distant shouts, the sound of equipment. Might have been a dream. But then there were hands on him, real hands, and lights. Bright lights that hurt his eyes. Paramedics, rescue workers. They were lifting the beam, carefully extracting him from the rubble. Someone was saying he was lucky, so incredibly lucky, that someone had reported his exact location, or they might not have found him in time. "Where's the boy?" Richard asked. "Where's Marcus?" The paramedic looked confused. "What boy, sir?" "The kid who found me, Marcus. He went to get help." "Sir, you need to stay calm. We're going to get you to the hospital." They loaded him onto a stretcher, carried him out of the building. Outside, the street was chaos. Emergency vehicles everywhere. Crowds behind police tape. News cameras. Richard's head of security was there, looking relieved and stressed in equal measure. "Where's the boy?" Richard asked him. "The kid named Marcus who got help." His security chief shook his head. "I don't know about any boy." "Mr. Calloway, we got a call from your phone's emergency." "GPS, that's how we found you." But Richard's phone had been crushed in the collapse. He'd seen it destroyed beyond function. None of this made sense. At the hospital, they stabilized him. Broken ribs, fractured arm, severe contusions. His heart had been under tremendous stress but somehow held steady. The doctors called it miraculous given his previous cardiac history. They wanted to keep him for observation, run more tests, make sure there was no internal bleeding. Richard barely heard them. He kept thinking about Marcus, the boy's calm face, his steady hands, his impossible words about his father saving people through him. On the third day in the hospital, Richard's assistant brought him his salvaged belongings from the collapse site. His wallet, his watch, and somehow impossibly a phone that wasn't his, scratched and dirty but functional. She said rescue workers had found it near where he'd been trapped. Richard turned it on. It was an old model. The screen cracked but still working. He went through the photos. Saw images of a man and a boy. The boy was Marcus, younger in these photos, but unmistakably him. The man had kind eyes and a warm smile. There were text messages too. Conversations between Marcus and his father from 2 years ago, before the father's death. Richard read them, feeling like an intruder but unable to stop. One message stood out. It was from the father to Marcus, sent late at night. "Remember, son, the measure of a person isn't what they achieve. It's what they give. It's how they treat people when there's nothing to gain. That's where real wealth lives. In kindness. In showing up for others. That's my legacy to you." Richard sat with that phone for a long time. Then he called his assistant. "I need you to find someone for me," he said. "A boy named Marcus, around 12 or 13 years old, lives on the south side near the factory site." It took 2 days. His team tracked down 3 possibilities. Richard insisted on meeting each one personally. The third Marcus was the right one. Richard knew the moment the boy walked into his hospital room with his grandmother. Same eyes, same quiet presence. "You're alive," Marcus said, and there was genuine relief in his voice. "Because of you." Marcus shrugged. "I just did what anyone should do. But most people wouldn't. Most people would have run." Richard looked at the grandmother. She was a small woman, probably in her 70s, with silver hair and hands worn from hard work. "Your grandson saved my life." She smiled, but there was sadness in it. His father would be proud. Richard took a breath. "I found a phone. In the rubble. I think it belonged to your son." The grandmother's eyes widened. "We lost that when David died. We thought it was gone forever." Richard held it out to her. "The message is on here. They're beautiful. Your son was a wise man." "He was," she said softly. "He worked maintenance at one of the office buildings downtown. Spent his whole life taking care of people. Never made much money, but he was rich in all the ways that mattered." Richard felt that crack in his chest widen further. "What building?" "Calloway Tower," she said. The words hit Richard like a physical blow. "Your son worked for my company. For 15 years, she confirmed. He loved that job. Loved making sure everything worked right, that people were safe." Richard closed his eyes. He had walked past men like David every day, had never learned their names, had never seen them as anything more than part of the infrastructure, like the heating system or the elevators. After that, he asked Marcus to visit him every day he remained in the hospital. They talked. Really talked. Marcus told him about his father, about the lessons he'd learned, about how hard it was to be the man his dad had wanted him to be now that he was gone. Richard told Marcus about Elena, about the regrets that had piled up like unpaid debts. You should call her, Marcus said simply. She won't want to hear from me. You don't know that. And even if she hangs up, at least you tried. That's what matters. The trying. Richard made the call that night. His hands shook as he dialed the number he'd kept all these years but never used. It rang 4 times. He almost hung up. Then, hello? Elena's voice, cautious, uncertain. Elena, it's your father. Silence on the other end. Then, I heard about the collapse. I almost called. I wish you had. Another pause. Why are you calling now? Because I almost died. And all I could think about was how I wasted the time we had. How I chose everything else over you. How you were right about all of it. He heard her breath catch. Dad, I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know I can't get back the years. But I want to try. If you'll let me, I want to try to be the father I should have been. She was crying. He could hear it in her voice when she spoke. I've wanted to hear you say that for so long. They talked for 2 hours. It was awkward and painful and beautiful. She told him about her life. About the nonprofit she'd started working with homeless youth. About the man she'd married, a teacher. About the daughter Richard didn't know he had. His granddaughter, 6 years old. He told her about Marcus. About lying in the rubble and being saved by a boy who'd learned kindness from a father who'd been invisible in Richard's world. I want to do better, he said. I want to mean something beyond the money. When Richard was released from the hospital, he didn't go back to work immediately. Instead, he met with his executive team and announced changes. The Southside Factory project was canceled. The building would be donated to the community for use as a youth center, fully funded and maintained by the Callaway Foundation, a foundation that would be established in memory of David Morrison, Marcus's father. He established a program to learn the names of every employee in his buildings, started having lunch in the employee cafeteria, began asking questions and actually listening to the answers. His board was concerned. His shareholders worried. Richard didn't care. For the first time in decades, he felt like he was building something that mattered. He had dinner with Elena and her family every Sunday. Met his granddaughter, Sophie, who had his daughter's eyes and a laugh that made his heart hurt in the best possible way. He taught Sophie about business, but more importantly, he learned from her about what it meant to see the world with wonder instead of calculation. Marcus and his grandmother became part of his extended family. Richard funded Marcus's education, but more than that, he learned from the boy, learned about resilience and grace, learned that real strength wasn't in dominating others, but in lifting them up. 1 year after the collapse, Richard stood at the opening ceremony of the David Morrison Youth Center. Marcus was there along